This video tutorial is part of the MoCA L.I.ghts 2022 Anything Glows programming, created and facilitated by the Patchogue Arts Council, Museum of Contemporary Art Long Island, in partnership with the Greater Patchogue Chamber of Commerce, Village of Patchogue, and the Patchogue Medford Library. Hello everybody, my name is Amanda Reilly and I am a pop surrealist illustrator based here in Long Island, New York. I am so excited and thrilled to be a MoCA L.I.ghts 2022 featured artist. I have been participating in the MoCA L.I.ghts programming since its inception in late 2020. And I started doing a bit of animation in 2018 and 2019. I started self-teaching myself how to animate and taking a couple classes here or there in traditional and digital animation. I took the skill set and I started animating, personal work. Really never showing it much to the public here or there, but really just practicing and developing my skill set. When MoCA L.I.ghts came along in 2020, it's given me the opportunity to take my skill set and push the boundaries of what I was able to do with my work in animation. It's a unique experience that's helped me push my work so much further than how I could imagine. And it's a unique experience that you're able to create animations that liven up the landscape of Patchogue, and it creates a whole new dimension of public art. Okay, so today for this MoCA L.I.ghts 2022 tutorial video, we're going to create a frame-by-frame animation using Adobe Photoshop. And we're going to be creating an animated GIF or GIF character that can be projected on a wall or a theater marquee. What we'll do is we're going to be combining in this animation 3 different techniques that you can use together or separate on your own to create an animation. And those 3 techniques are as follows: is a full motion animation and a shimmery effect, and creating or adding still objects in an animation that don't move, that your animation could animate around. So it's important to know that animation can be as simple or as complex as you make it. It's important to know this so that when you're approaching this medium, you're not intimidated, because as a beginner, it is an intimidating medium to approach. There's really no shortcuts to animating. Trust me, there are none. But when you really understand the fundamentals of it and step-by-steps, it's an easy concept to grasp. So for this specific tutorial, I have decided that we are going to animate a dancing sassy dandelion. So it is important when you start animating a character or really any animation, it's important to sketch out your ideas. And when you sketch out your ideas, it is important to sketch out your poses and key poses. The more you sketch and the more poses you create, the easier it is to develop your animation going forward. So for instance, here is my sketchbook, and I have my key poses here, my little dance that he's going to do, as well as some character design work and some note taking. So I have a lot of scribble in my sketchbook. That's why I'm not projecting this, you know, or taking a photo of this on my screen, because the notes are so gibberish. They're notes that I understand, and that's what's important when you're, you know, when you're doing any kind of sketching, as long as you're understanding the notes and the sketches that you're doing, as long as they make sense to you and you're able to use them in your process going forward, then that's all right. So anyway, make sure you develop your keyframes in your sketches, and develop your character designs, per se, facial expressions, colors, movements, attitude, whatever kind of notes you want to take that help you in your process. Another important reference point that can be used is you can take a video of yourself dancing or moving to get a good idea of how your character or your entire animation should move. For this specific video, or tutorial I should say, I took a video of myself, so that way I can understand how the limbs and arms of my dancing character should move with specific timing, and how they should move and how they should act. And it's helpful. Like there's no shame in taking wacky videos of yourself for the sole purpose of making sure your animation looks complete and fluid. And it's only just another good jumping point that you can use to help you create. So further ado, let's get started, and take our sketches that we just drew out and start drawing them on Adobe Photoshop and start animating. Okay, so once you launch Photoshop, you're going to select Create New, and then double check your preset details, your width, your height, your resolution, which should stay 72 since it's an animation, and so should your color mode remain RGB since it's for the web. And once that's all set, you'll hit Create, and then once your file is open, you will go up to Window and scroll down to Timeline. And once you have that selected, you'll go to Create Video Timeline, which launches your animation window. And then this is where all of the animating with the layers will happen in this window. So before you begin your project, you're going to want to save. So go down to File, Save As. Make sure to select a file name that you want to use. Mine will be Flower Animation. And then go ahead and make sure your file is saved as a Photoshop file and hit Save. So before beginning your animation, I'm going to explain the timeline a little bit to you guys. So basically the timeline allows us to build the different layers, aka frames, in order to animate. So basically, as you add new layers, the timeline will also show that. So I'm going to name my base layer background because that'll be my background layer. And then once I name that, I can start adding my frames. So every time I add a new layer into my timeline, or I should say into my layers panel, it reflects onto my timeline. So each of these layers that I have created are separate frames. So for instance, we have now frame 1 or layer 1, frame 2 or layer 2, frame 3 or layer 3, and so on and so forth. So each of these layers, you can pull and push the duration of how long each frame stays on camera. I'll be setting my frames to 2 seconds each because I'll be animating at 24 frames per second, setting my frames to hold for 2 seconds each. 2 to 3 seconds each is generally an industry standard for frame by frame animation. So as I create my new frames or my new layers, I can set them to ascending or descending stair design, which allows them to pop on screen and off screen as the playhead moves forward through the video timeline. And in part, this is very reminiscent similar to a traditional pen and paper animation technique. You have the pages above and the pages below. That's, I think, the best way to really visualize this digital timeline. Go into the timeline panel options, select onion skin settings, and here you have the option to be able, as you're working on your animation, to see the frames above and the frames below the current frame you're working on as you're working with your main keyframe poses and developing your in-between frames. Now that we have an understanding of how the timeline works in Photoshop, we're going to begin our project. So we're going to go to the video timeline options, set timeline frame rate, and we're going to set it to 24 frames per second. All right, so remember that wacky little reference video and all those little sketches we had done before? Now we're going to put them to use. So we're going to start by developing our keyframes. So using your sketches, and if you created a reference video, which can be helpful for certain key poses, we're going to start on our layer above our background layer and develop lines of action for our dandelion character. So I'm developing the shoulders, where the shoulders will turn, and the hip of the character, and which direction it will move. So I start with my first keyframe and really like referencing my sketches and my video to really get a more convincing and accurate pose. And this is where the onion skin settings come in handy. So basically, when you create your first frame into your second frame, you can set it where you can see the frames above and below. So now when I create my second key pose onto the next frame, when I move the playhead, I can see the layer below, which makes it helpful when I'm creating my second keyframe based upon the first keyframe that I just drew out. Also, it's important to mention that these keyframes are important in our animation because these are the main poses in which our animation is developed. And when these key poses are developed, then you can start animating your in-betweens, which are the animations in between that make your animation more fluid. Now that we've drawn in a rough sketch of our body, we want to add arms to our character. So using our reference video and our reference sketches and key poses that we've sketched out, we'll start drawing in our character's limbs. So using our little reference video that I made, my right facing arm is faced up or upwards in the first frame, and then downwards my left arm is facing down in the first frame. And then for the rest of your key frames, you'll do the same thing. You'll adjust, either if you have a video, you'll adjust the pose in the video, or again, reference your sketches and draw in your character's limbs. Once you're done drawing your main key poses, it's time to fill in your animation with in-betweens. Now, in-betweens are drawings that fill in between your main keyframes. Now, using the onion skin option in your timeline layers panel, you are able to now see in between each of the keyframes that you've drawn, which will allow you to fill in between those frames, making your animation more smoother and convincing. And do keep in mind that while you draw in your in-betweens, to basically understand the motion in your specific animation, like per se the limbs and the way the hip is moving in my animation, that I'm keeping in mind the path of action. And the path of action will allow you to keep shapes and forms staying concrete so they don't get too skewed where you get to the point you're beginning to lose information as you're animating in your keyframes and in your in-betweens. And feel free to flip through the playhead to see how your animation looks as you're working. Now that we are done drawing out a wireframe for our animation, we're going to start filling in the form of the body of my little figure. So I'm going to choose a different color than the one I initially chose. That way I can differentiate what lines are what. And I'm basically going to go around in each of my keyframe in between layers and map out through form and shape, paying attention to the lines of action that I have drafted out, creating a form for the first pass in our animation. Now we're going to do the same thing with my character's arms that we had just done previously with the character's form and body. I'm going to choose a different color. That way, again, I can differentiate the different draft lines that I'm creating for the arms. I'm also drawing in guides here, so that way when I start drawing my long drapey leaves, they stay the same size and same shape through my pose and through the animation I create, so that way the animation comes off more convincing and doesn't come off sloppy and the form starts to change through each of the frames I draw. Now keep in mind that the lines you create for your first pass can be rough and loose because this is just a draft phase. Now coming up, we're going to redraw more finer lines onto the figure, tracing what our more draft lines. These first pass lines are just really a guide onto our final pass or our final animation. Alright, so now everything is coming together. So we have a sketched out character, and I've gone ahead and I've started the first frame of a final drawing. So I'm going to show you, I go and I create a new layer that isn't the draft layer, because we don't want to draw on the draft layer because we're going to end up deleting that. So I go and I create a new layer. I can position it above my draft layer on the timeline. Make sure that the time sequence is the same as the draft I had just done. And again, it's actually very helpful to continue to reference your sketches, and if you made a video, while you're drawing your final, so that way you make sure that everything is concrete and lines up, allows you to have a fluid animation. So now I'm going to animate my character's head. So I've decided I want to do a shimmering animation technique for my character's head. And what we're going to do is I'm going to create a new layer and create a final drawing. So not a draft, because we're going to be using our, like if you did a sketch underneath, I'm going to draw over that. I'm going to create one singular drawing. And what I'm going to do is, after I'm done drawing that singular drawing, is I'm going to draw over this drawing in a couple of frames, creating new layers for each drawing, and using the layers panel and your onion skin settings to match the previous drawing you just drew out onto the next one. And you can have a lot of fun with this. You could make each drawing similar, or you can sort of play it up and you can make things a little interesting and warp each drawing and make it a really chaotic shimmering animation. Tracing over the same final drawing over and over and over in a couple of frames, once it's complete, once you run the playhead, it has a pretty cool shimmering movement effect. I definitely recommend doing over 3 drawings because then the shimmering effect will be quite short. And when you do more drawings, per se 4, 5, or 6, it definitely gives it a cooler, livelier effect. Now, shimmering animations could be used for pose holds, or you can even animate typography and lettering that way, or even if you have like a simple black and white drawing that you want to add a little bit more life to, you can use something like the shimmering effect. You don't want to create like a full-on animation for it. Now I'm going to add a still element into my little animated character, which will be her little roots. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to pick a color that I would like to draw in, and I'll draw a final drawing right over the draft. Now I'll have this layer running through my entire animation since it's a constant still element. I'll also, since it's above or will be above my character or on top of, I will make sure that it is positioned above the rest of my layers. So now we're going to draw in our character's face, and just like the still element that we had drawn before, we're going to make a new layer that's going to stay constant through the animation. And referencing my underlying sketch, I'll draw out my extra grumpy dandelion face. All right, so now we are up to coloring. Now coloring is the final phase of our animation. So after coloring, the only thing that is left is final last minute tweaking, deleting any draft layers, as well as merging the line and color layers together. So that way our output, our final GIF file is small. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin by creating a new layer underneath each of the frames that we are going to color. We are not going to color directly on the frame layers that we drew our animation lines. This is going to be separate. So for each frame that you have drawn out, you're going to make a new layer for color, designated for color. You're going to do this under every single line frame. So here I am coloring my shimmering layers of my dandelion head, and I'm going to color in with a contrasting bright yellow. Now doing the same, I'm going to color my character's body and arms. And for this, I'm going to choose a really bright pop of green. I'm also going to make sure that any layers that need to be repositioned are at this stage. Like per se, any objects that need to be in front, I make sure that they are at the topmost layers. Once I'm done coloring my character's body layers, I will then merge it with the corresponding
outline layers. Again, that way it keeps my file small, manageable, and less confusing. At this stage, I'm going to now work on duplicating certain animated layers, so that way it gives them the ability to loop or loop longer through the entirety of my animation and not just a couple of frames. And for example, I'm going to be duplicating the layers of my shimmering flower head for my character, so that way it loops longer through my animation. So for this, I'll just be doing a simple copy and paste, matching it with each of the outline frames that I had created and I had merged with the color layers. This is so that my shimmering character's head can loop through the entire animation on each layer. At this point, I'm going to combine my character's shimmering head layers with the rest of the body layers, making this a complete cohesive animation. Putting in some last minute details, I'm going to make a new layer and I am going to color the static object in my animation. As a reminder, if you're having a static object in your animation and you want it to remain on screen, do be sure when you visit your timeline panel to drag out the duration so it's not just 2 seconds like the rest of your frame by frame animation, but longer. So that way it stays on screen as long as you need it to be. Okay, now we are going to create a full loop for our animation. How we're going to do this is we're going to copy and paste the second to last layer through the second from first layer. We don't want to copy and paste the first layer or frame because that is the beginning of your loop and you don't want that repeated. If you do try to repeat it, it will just look like a delayed frame hold. We don't need to copy the last layer either because that already is the end of your loop, so there's really no need to repeat that either. So now when we save our animation as a GIF, now that it is fully completely looped, it will continue or be able to continue to seamlessly repeat over and over again. And once you are done duplicating the layers to complete your loop, feel free to rename them just to stay organized. It's good to make good habits of organizing your layers because, for example, let's say you decide to bring this animation into another Adobe program like After Effects, you're going to need to know what layer is what. It also increases your work efficiency when you stay organized, as well as being able to steer clear of any confusion while you're animating. Last but not least, we have to now save our file so we can have it animate. So we're going to go up to File, Export, Save for Web Legacy. Once the window opens, it might take a little bit to load. Once it opens, make sure your presets are all correctly selected for GIF. And if you have a transparent animation, make sure transparent is checked, as well as under looping options on the bottom, make sure it says forever. And then you're going to hit save. Make sure that you're going to save your file in the correct folder and name it whatever you like. I'm naming mine Flower Final GIF. Hit save. And at this point, you can go into your folder that you have your animation GIF saved. I'm animating from an iMac, so I'm using Preview, or you can drag and drop it into a web browser and it will animate within the browser. So I think our dancing dandelion character is complete. So there you have it, a animation done in Adobe Photoshop utilizing the video timeline tool. Be sure to check out the Anything Glows MoCA L.I.ghts display coming up this October 13th through the 16th at the Village of Patchogue. Please visit patchoguearts.org for more information.